This video has been sponsored by GSDSP. Now, my name is haQ, you're watching a hack attack, and the first thing I want to highlight inside quantum delay right off the bat is this section here, because this is what drew me to GSDSP's apps in the first place. All of their apps are using the same modulation section, and it's full of really interesting modulation sources. And there are some sources in there that you don't typically find in any other apps.
Kick the door in, boombox in a mix. Melody slipping on some drunken pitch. 808 knock with a bit of drift. Beat took a sip, now it can't quite sit. Tipsy turntable got a mind of its own. Needle do the wobble, never stick to the zone. Bassline staggering, missing a step. Makes the whole jam sound, what the fuck? Snare goes sideways, hat's a little late. Synths off key, makes you gyrate. Everything swaying with that awkward groove. Got the track skipping and the beat improves. Beats getting wild, can't keep it inside. Loops go loopy, chaos won't hide. Crowds moving fast, everybody on sync. Jacob goes wonky, makes you stop and think.
As you can see right now, there are 9 different types of sources, and inside of each of these categories, there are many more options. Let's say you want something random to modulate a knob. Well, instead of going into the random sections, which actually hold some really interesting stuff, we go to the dynamical systems and we check for the double pendulum. Now, this one is amazing at creating really weird, unpredictable random movements. Now, one thing I have to point out is the envelope follower section, because in it we find stuff like pitch, which follows the pitch of the audio. Or how about something like spectral brightness, which actually follows the perceived brightness of the incoming audio. So, all in all, there are 64 sources that you can use to modulate up to 20 destinations inside quantum delay. And so when I highlight them, you can see for yourselves that it's basically almost all of the buttons and knobs in here. Now, with all of that said, quantum delay is a delay plugin, so of course it can do loads of delay stuff. But on top of that, thanks to all of these destinations that we can modulate, well, we can create our own stutter and pump effects. We can also bring the delay time down as low as into just a few milliseconds, so we can do flangers. And again, thanks to all of that modulation, we can also do some really weird effects, stuff that don't sound like delays at all. Now, I don't know about you, but I am a complete sucker for any piece of hardware or software that allows me to modulate stuff in strange ways with strange sources, and quantum delay certainly doesn't disappoint. Now, there is a lot to go through here, and we're gonna start in a little bit, but first, I just want to highlight the fact that I am reviewing the full version of quantum delay, but there is also a light version available, and it is 100% free. Now, there are, of course, differences between the two versions, and you can see them right here, but the modulation section is still there if you want to try it out before you actually go and buy the full thing. But I'm pretty convinced that after you've seen this video, if you stick with me, you're gonna have a hard time not buying the full version. Let's go.
Step to the mic, got a rhythm to display. My words bounce back like they're stuck in replay. Echo in the chamber, got the crowd in the sway. Say it once now, but you hear it twice.
Okay.
Feed it through the line, then it follows with the trail. Like my voice took a trip, then it came back in the mail.
On time.
Nah man, I'm fashionably late. Every line I drop, got a twin that can't wait. Ahead of my time, but behind in the sound. Every syllable I spit keeps on coming around. You catch it right now, then you catch it again. Like my future self is talking back to my friends. Loop it in your mind, let it stretch and extend. Every word I send, got an echo to defend. I don't rush the groove, let it lag, let it play. Cause the best ideas always find their own way.
Now, we have the modulation controls down here at the bottom. In the middle, we have all of the delay controls, and at the top, we have some utilities. And the first thing I want to show you is if you need any in-app help, you can just activate the question mark up here, and then when you touch a knob or a button, you will have a pop-up with an explanation in it. Now, another thing I want to highlight is the background brightness. Now, this will give you a little knob in the middle here where you can actually set the brightness of that nice looking spacey background. And so I'm gonna remove the background completely to make the interface as readable as possible, just so you can see exactly what's going on in my tutorials. By the way, I noticed a nice little detail here because the background actually changes over time, and it's kind of hard to see unless you've got it set up like I do now in an editor where I'm able to scroll through footage. Yeah, just thought it was a nice detail. Now we're gonna jump to the middle where we have the preset system. You can see the actual folder name here to the left and the actual preset name to the right. Now you can switch presets by either tapping these buttons here on the side, or you can just tap on these boxes to get a menu. Now, if you want to create your own folders to save your own presets in, well, you can always just go into this menu, go to subcategory and then choose create. And then it will prompt you by just letting you write a name into here. And then as soon as you've done that, that subcategory is then created. And from there on out, you can just keep on saving presets into it. Now, if you have a lot of presets in here that you've made and you want to back them up, or maybe just share them, well, just go to the menu in the upper left corner, go into Manage Presets, and here you have a list for importing and exporting presets. And you can always select a preset that always loads every time the app opens. Now, A/B systems are really nice when you're working with patch creation, and quantum delay has that too up here. That means that you have two different modes you can work in. So if you have something you already like and you want to try something else out, well, you just have to press this button and this will copy whatever you have in A right over to B. And now you can start working from the B mode by just selecting it. Now, once you're inside of the B mode, you can always copy the B back to the A. And everything you do in either A or B, well, it all gets saved when you're saving a preset. Now we're gonna jump all the way over here where we have an undo and a redo. So if you end up doing any doo-doos in the app, you can undo the doo-dooing by pressing undo. Now lastly, if you really don't like tweaking stuff yourself, you can always randomize stuff with these options over here. Now, activating this icon over here lets you select what type of parameters you actually do want randomized. And as default, all of the parameters that are randomizable are selected. And then we have three amounts of randomization that we can select through these three dices. And you can view them as low, medium, and high. Lastly, there is an on-off button for the delay, and if you press this, you're literally just turning the effect off. Now, the audio flows from left to right inside quantum delay. So it first hits the input, where we have input selection, where we can select either to listen to the full stereo signal or just left or right channels. And we've also got an input gain control with a maximum of 12 dB gain. Next, we have the time section. After that, we've got the filter section, and then we got the feedback section. And when it comes to the time, filter, and feedback, well, we have these buttons up here, which allows us to separate both channels to have individual controls for time, filter, and feedback. Now, if you want to work with true stereo delay type patches, then you don't really have to activate all of these sections to split them all up. You only need one of them to really make a difference if you have individual settings for them. However, none of that will help if you don't have the bipolar width control at least pulled up a bit over the zero. And it's bipolar for a reason. It's actually inverting, so it can flip the left-right channels if you pull it counterclockwise into the negative ranges. Alright, so time stage. Now here I want to highlight the two different time algorithms. The tape pitches the delay tail when you're tweaking around with the time controls, while the fade only fades. Next up, we have the time controls. You got one for delay time, and then we have a fine-tuning control for that. And right now it's synced, but if we unsync it, we can work in milliseconds, which is what you want to do if you want to do stuff like flanger effects, or at least effects where you have very, very short delay times. And if I pull this all the way down, we get to 20 milliseconds. Then we can dial it in further by working with this bipolar fine control, which gives us plus minus 20 milliseconds to work with. So you can get into the really, really small ranges of time with this one. Now, if you'd rather work with time divisions, just activate sync and you'll have just that. Now, you can also decide what time divisions you want on the knob. You can have all of them by activating all of these boxes, but if you just want a few ones, then you can select between regular notes, triplets, dotted, and 5 tuplets. And let me just highlight that this is pretty brilliant, because when you are modulating a time knob in a synced mode such as this, well, it's very nice to be able to decide exactly what type of time divisions you have on the knob. Next, we get to the filter section, where we have 3 types of filters. Now, the low-pass filter and high-pass filter have selectable slopes going from 1 pole all the way up to 4 poles. However, with the bandpass filter, we actually have a seamless control of the cue point. Next, we have a pretty intricate feedback section with a feedback control, of course, but then there are some interesting little buttons here. This one is a 180-degree phase shift switch. This can lead to some interesting results because it could lead to phase cancellations or reinforcements. Next, we have 3 buttons up here, where this one is a crossfeed button. You can turn the crossfeed on or off. Over here, we have a knife which cuts off the feedback instantly. And all of you Dubheads out there, listen up. This icon right here, which looks like a warning symbol, well, when you activate it, it will allow the feedback to go beyond 100%. And that's what you want when you're dealing with dub. But be careful, you might want to add a limiter at the end of the effect chain there so you don't blow out your ears or something. Oh, and one thing I really want to highlight here, you can actually modulate the behavior of these 3 buttons. Now lastly, I want to highlight the 2 different algorithms for the feedback. Having it set to percentage just means that you're setting the feedback in percentages. However, there is a more interesting algorithm in here because if you switch it over to dBs, then the feedback will actually adjust dynamically based on the delay time. Lastly, we have the output section with stereo panning and also with control, which I explained a little bit earlier, but if you pull it down to 0, you're getting a mono-like effect. Now, we also have a dry-wet control, and then we have an output gain with a maximum of 12 dBs. Now, when it comes to delay techniques, we've already got the tape effect down because that's just one of the algorithms in here. But when it comes to other classical types of delay techniques, we can easily set up our own as long as you know how they work. For instance, a slapback delay. This one is really easy to set up. We work within about 40 to 150 milliseconds, and we use almost no feedback. And then we just mix that in back with the original signal. Now, a ping-pong delay is even simpler because you only activate one side of the inputs. What do I mean? Well, we're not going to use a stereo input here. We're going to use either left or right. And then we're going to go over to the feedback section and turn on the crossfeed, which means that we will hear the delay on the right side and then the feedback on the left side. Now, sticking on the topic of old school analog delay types here, the next one is based on bucket brigade delay reverbs. Now, to do a reverb, well, we basically need to work within 20 to 50 milliseconds. We also need a pretty high enough feedback so we get lots of repeating feedback in the delay trail. And since it's old school, we're also going to use a low pass filter to filter off the signal. And there we go. Now we have a bucket brigade delay type reverb. Now, I want to show you another really nice old school analog delay type, which is the dub delay. Now, this algorithm is very special because it's more like an instrument and it's not like an effect you just set up and walk away from. You need to control it live. So, first of all, we're going to start with the times. I usually work in milliseconds, but if I do have it synced, well, personally, I like to set it up in triplets or dotted. Next, we go to the feedback because for a proper dub delay, you absolutely need the feedback to have no limit at all. So that little warning triangle, press that. But you don't want to pull up on the feedback all the way yet. Be very careful here. As soon as this is activated, you could easily get runaway feedback. And then we basically put one finger on the filter cutoff and then one finger on the feedback, and then you play with them. Right now, the modulation section is quite empty, but before we add anything, I just want to focus in on these controls over here. Here we have a global amount control for the output of the modulation. Now over here we have a sample and hold button. So basically when you press this, you're just sampling all of the values that the modulators are spitting out and holding them. And if you want to turn the modulation section off or bypass it, you just press this button over here. Right, so it's very empty right now, so we're gonna jump back to the 8 slots of modulation that it can hold, and we're gonna press one of the plus signs. Now here we get our list of 9 categories of modulation types, and depending on what we choose, we either have 1 or 2 or 3 axes of modulation output. But we're gonna start out simple by just selecting an LFO. Now on the outer left side, we have a few controls. We have an on-off button, a bipolar unipolar switch, a sample and hold or pause button, and if we wanted to switch to a different type of modulator for this slot, we can just open up the modulator menu with the button at the bottom of the list. Now there's 3 more buttons on the other side of the modulator section, and if we press the first one, we get to copy whatever we've done inside a modulator. Now if we go to an empty modulator slot, we can then paste it right in there. Now if you for some reason wanted to delete your modulation and leave an empty slot, you just use the button down there. Now when it comes to the modulator you're loading in here, there are 3 distinct sections. In the first section, we usually find stuff like trigger, sync, and rate controls. If we have a look at something like an LFO, then we have 4 controls right here. The first one says host, and it simply just syncs the LFO to the host, but the LFO actually runs free. Now, the second one is also a host sync control. However, it also syncs to playback, so it restarts the LFO every time the playback is restarted in the host. Now you also have a gate mode and a trigger mode, and the gate mode works kind of like a note gate where you just play a note, right? And you hold it down and whatever is going on until you let go of it and turn the gate off. The second one, the trigger, is more like a one-shot, so it basically needs to get triggered. It runs a cycle of whatever modulator you have in there, and it won't run it again until you trigger it again. Now, both of them have this manual little trigger down here that you can use, and the cool thing is that it can be modulated. Now when it comes to the rate control, it basically works like the rate control up in the delay section. But here you also have 7 tuplets, 9 tuplets, and 11 tuplets. Now we also find specific controls that are related to the type of modulator we're working with. And sometimes there are no controls at all. Now the middle section provides us tools like phase offset, filtering, and also amount control. If you're working with a waveform modulator like an LFO, you usually have controls for offset, skewing, sloping, and if you're working with a sample and hold, you can add smoothing. Now, this section is also where you find the mapping button or buttons, depending on what modulator you're using. And to map something, you just simply activate it, and then you can see in the delay section where all of the elements that you can modulate are highlighted. Now, to map something, you just simply press on it and it is linked to that modulator. Now, you can select several elements at the same time, and if you want to remove some, you just simply tap on that same controller button to unlink it. Now, I'm gonna add a lot of modulation here on several elements for demonstrational purposes, so we can head into the last section here where we can edit the offset and also ranges of the modulation output. So now that we have this list, we can individually per modulated item control their offset and also modulation ranges. And we do it with two sliders. Now, as I slide on the first one, which is linked to a knob, you can see that as I'm moving it, the knob is also moving. So we can see the offset we're doing. And with the second slider, we can control the range of modulation. One thing to highlight here is that right now the range control is bipolar. But remember, if we go back to the left side here on the modulation section, we can switch this over from a bipolar mode to a unipolar mode. And as soon as I did that, we can now see that the range control is also unipolar. So it will only move one way and not across an equilibrium like it did before. And this is invertible, of course, so we can have it either moving this way or we can have it moving this way. Now, one of the nicest features in here is that you get to modulate the modulators. You see, you might have noticed the empty row of modulation slots underneath the main modulation section. Well, if we go into one of the pluses here and open it up, you can see that it's the same modulation source menu as we have in the main one. So if we just select an LFO and we go to assign here, and then we go to the mapping button and highlight it, you can see that in the main modulation section, all of the controls just lit up, and now we can map those too. To really hammer it in, this second section is just as powerful and includes all of the things that you can find inside of the main modulation section. However, you won't be able to use it to modulate any knobs within the delay section. It's just there to modulate the modulators. GSDSP put out an update for all of their apps where they've made some really nice improvements, because they've made this look like this now. And it's going to be extremely useful for us right now as we set up our first effect, which is going to be a flanger. First of all, the delay time. And an effective range for flangers is basically like 0.4 or 5 milliseconds up to maybe 5 or 6 milliseconds. So we go up to the delay section and we turn off sync. We pull it all the way down to 20 milliseconds and then we shave off more with the fine control. Might want to leave some space down here for modulation movement. Next, we go down to the modulation section. We add an LFO, and it's really important what type of waveform you're choosing here. Because if you want it to sound really old school and analogy, well, if you look at a lot of old flanger effects, even choruses, a lot of them are using triangular waveforms. So that's what we're going to be using. Now, none of this is going to work unless we actually link up this modulation to the fine-tuning controller. So we're doing that right now. And then we can go over to edit the range of the modulation movement in the modulation range editor. And here is where this new upgrade that GSDSP has just done with the modulation range editor is going to help out so much, because now we actually get to see the values we're working with right inside of the window. And this makes it so easy to set up the modulation movement here because we only need this to move a few milliseconds, like 4 or 5, depending on the type of flanger sound we want out of this. Now, after this, we can then experiment with the type of filtering we want and also how much feedback we want. Next, we're gonna head into chorus land, and this is gonna be so easy because we can basically keep all the settings we've made in the rest of the plugin except from the delay time. So we're gonna move past flanger delay times, and we're gonna move this up. So we start about 7 milliseconds, go up a little further, and we're gonna have a little bit of a faster movement here, and we'll move this one up here. Now, the flanger and chorus are effects where you use both the dry and wet signals to get the desired result. However, with the next effect, you only use the wet signal, which is the vibrato. The modulation time range for a vibrato basically lives in flanger territory, so about 0 to 15 milliseconds or something like that. However, you can easily move further up in the range and make it more extreme. And when it comes to vibratos in general, I like it when they sound more ghostly, so pretty fast modulation. Now, the vibrato can easily be turned into a drunken type of pitching effect, which sounds great on your 80s leads and arpeggios and other types of sounds where you kind of want an unstable pitching type of effect. And so to get it to sound really unstable, we're gonna select something really interesting like the pendulum, because it is so good at creating erratic, unpredictable movements. Now, this is going to be a delay effect, so we're going to pull the delay up to 200 or 300 milliseconds here, and then we reset the pendulum by pressing on this thing here a few times until we get something we like, and then just let it go. Now, I have noticed that pendulums can have this tendency to equalize and kind of get stuck in a pattern, and I don't want that. So what we're going to do is we're going to go down to here and add another modulator, and we're going to go in here and add another pendulum. And then we're going to take this axis and link it to the mass, and this one and link it to the length. And now it's doing weird stuff with our first pendulum. It's never going to get stuck in the same loop again. It's just going to do some really wild stuff. Now, what about building patches for rhythmical material like drums and or percussions? Well, first of all, I do suggest you sync your time before you start using it. But second of all, when it comes to the modulation, certain types of waveforms make perfect sense for rhythmical stuff like sawtooth and pulse. But I would argue it's way more fun to use random sources like sample and hold, especially when they're not smoothed, so they do these jerky reactions up and down. However, when you're using stuff like that, well, these things move a little bit too random for me sometimes, and I want more control. And the modulation section does not disappoint, because if we go into the random category, well, one of them, we have something called a random oscillator. Now, this one will move up or down, kind of like a pulse waveform. However, the values will be random, but it will always have an up and then a down and then an up type of movement. I would also recommend random walk, because before it takes a step, it always tosses a coin to decide whether it's going up or down. We also have the uniform one, where every value has an equal chance of happening. Another one that is really interesting is random switch, because it will move to an absolute maximum up and absolute minimum down every time, like a switch. But on top of that, it also randomly decides for how long a switch is supposed to be up or down. So it ends up being like a pulse waveform with randomly changing PVM. Lastly, we would have to go back to the regular LFO, where we have the custom one, because this one allows you to basically draw in your own modulation. And with this switch, you can basically divide this area into a grid, which makes it easier to draw in rhythmical modulation. However, a word of warning though, here comes my first bit of criticism. It's not that easy to draw in here with your fingers on an iPad, even though I've got the big iPad. Because my fingers are big, this little box is very, very small. So yeah, not easy at all. I've tried my best to show you how powerful quantum delay is and the range of different types of delays it can create, and also mod effects. And thanks to the very powerful modulation section here with all of these super interesting modulation sources, well, there's a bunch of options for you to get really creative with the type of mod effects you make in here. Yeah, quantum delay is great, but that doesn't mean that I don't have some complaints. One of the complaints you've already heard, it's when you go into the LFO and you select the custom one. Well, it's great that it's here because I love making my own waveforms. However, I don't like the fact that it feels like I need a pencil or a mouse to actually control it, because it's too tiny to control with your fingers. And I'm a touch kind of guy. You know, I use an iPad as a central hub in all of my creativity. So it's annoying. My next complaint is that there is no drive in here. I would very much love to have a drive so you could dirty up the signal. GSDSP noise is our friend. It would really add another level of sound design to an already good sounding delay effect, I admit, but yeah, it would just make it a little bit better. Now, there's actually more stuff in here I haven't really gone through in my video, like being able to use the gyro inside of an iPad to actually control stuff in here. Or how about the MIDI controls? It's got its own internal MIDI mapping system, and also I never talked about the macros. Hey, I didn't even mention that you could turn these controls into knobs if you just press over here. Yeah. And then there's all of these really fun modulation sources that I really didn't show you, but these are just things you're gonna have to discover for yourself when you go and buy Quantum Delay. In my opinion, Quantum Delay is both for beginners and also for seasoned sound designers like myself, because there's so much to work with. And if you don't like to work with a lot, well, it's very easy to set things up here. There aren't really that many controls you need to focus on at any given time. And if you're a beginner, there's presets. And if you want more free presets, I've got some. You see, I've been making presets as I've been working with this video, and I put all of those presets in a zipped little package that you can go and grab for free if you make a $0 purchase over at my Gumroad page. Right, so in my opinion, Quantum Delay is one of the most powerful and creative modular delays on iOS, and I highly recommend it. Check out my pinned comment in the comment section under this video to find all of the necessary links you need to go and buy Quantum Delay. And also, I would say thank you so much GSDSP for sponsoring this video and for sponsoring work made by humans. Thank you so much. Also, a massive thank you to all of my patrons who are sticking with me through really hard times. I love you so much. Also, a massive thank you to my audience who have been supporting me all these years, watching all of my videos, and it's pretty crazy. It's been great, and you know, I'm pushing 50 now. My eyesight is getting worse. I need better reading glasses every 6 months, it feels like. My right knee is getting shitty, and we're living in some really dark times. But you know what? None of that matters, because I'm gonna keep on doing exactly what I've been doing for these past, well, soon to be 13 years of attaQ. I'm gonna make some videos that you enjoy to watch about apps and some portable hardware. Yeah, that's just the way it's going to be. Now, as usual, I wish you a very productive week. Now go finger all of your stuff and have a lot of fun doing it.